All right. Okay. So, welcome to CG Animation. Sorry, not CG Animation. Welcome to 3D modeling in Maya. Um, I've designed a few different courses, so I'm confusing the two. Sometimes I confuse the two courses. Yeah, welcome to 3D modeling in Maya. My name is Brad McLeod. I'm going to be your instructor, and we're going to have lots of fun in this course. Just, uh, just grabbing some. Yeah, CG animation in Maya. Uh, Welcome to the course. We're going to have lots of fun. We're going to be learning how to use Maya. This course is um, an introductory course to Maya and its uses, and not only an introductory course to Maya, but we're going to be learning how to uh, model, um, uh, texture, or use shaders. And I'll explain what those are in a little while. Um, and we're going to learn to light and render in Maya. So this course is geared towards people who want to be taking their designs and uh, whether you're a graphic designer or an architect or an illustrator, and you have ideas, you have designs, and you've always wanted to render them in 3D. So you've got plan drawings, elevation drawings, illustrations, or characters, or graphics, or whatnot, and you want to get into doing some renderings with 3D software. Um, we're going to be doing that. We're going to be using Maya. Maya is a very versatile software that's used mainly for animation and visual effects production. And there's loads of stuff you can do with Maya. You can do 3D renderings. Um, you can make animated films. You can make content for games, and content for web. There's endless possibilities, and this course, mainly what we're going to be doing is learning how to use Maya in a pretty rudimentary way, but we're going to be doing some basic 3D renderings and learn the basic components of Maya and its uses along the way. So um, I have Maya open here. Okay, so here's Maya. Okay, so let me get my mouse actually. And so here's Maya. It's a very, as I mentioned before, it's a very versatile package. You do lots of different stuff in it, and this is our today. What we're going to be talking about is our layout. We're going to be just introducing you to the user interface of Maya, where all the buttons are, and where you can find stuff, and we're gonna just give you an overview of the software, and then we'll delve into some things, some more complex things later on in the course. But today we're gonna just look at the user interface. So you can see here, like most softwares, we have up here at the top we've got the file menu. So in here we can create a new scene, we can open a scene, we can save scenes, we can save scene as, to name stuff, save increments, and import and export objects. So if you have a 3D model from another application and you want to bring it into Maya, it's very easy to do. You say import, and it gives you a few different options down here. Lots of different things, XBX, FBX, different file formats and whatnot. Um, so yeah, file. We've got loads of different things. Um, and then you got your edit. In edit, we've got copy paste, all that stuff. And as you go further down the line, you get into things like modifying display. Um, you can modify, allows you to modify objects by adding attributes. Um, you know, changing the pivot positions, whatever. Uh, Lots of different, basically just modifying objects and their attributes. You can create objects from here. Got the create tab. So we can we can create a cube. Right? We can create a cone. Whatever. Right. So it allows you to create objects. Right. Okay. So there's our cone. Under display, display just means it is what it sounds like. You can display stuff. Okay, so mainly you can hide the grid or bring the grid back. We can hide selected objects, and we can show selected objects. So grab my outliner. Shift H, I'll bring that back. So, um, different ways to display things. Um, you know, uh, window. Window allows us to view different windows. So we have things like an outliner, which is a window that gives us a list of our objects in our scene. Um, if we go into window again, we've got, and that, a component editor, which allows us to grab the components of an object. We've got animation editors, so we can open up the graph editor, and the graph editor shows us the curves of our our animation curves. If we have an object that's moving across the screen, we can view those curves. Very often it's used for animation. Okay. Under rendering editors, we have the hypershade. So we open the hypershade. The hypershade is used for texturing objects. Okay. So lots of different stuff. Right. Okay. So window. The window tab allows us to access the different windows in the software. Okay. Pretty self-explanatory. And then we've got a multitude of different tools in here. We've got mesh, which has all of the or many of the mesh editing tools, or mesh creation tools. Edit mesh is kind of self-explanatory. You have an object and you want to edit the object. Go into its components. You can edit those in here. You can add divisions to an object. So if you have a cube, you can slice the cube. We can bevel the edges of the cube. We can extrude faces. So if we have a polygon, we can pull out a face of the cube or a side of the cube. Okay, we can duplicate things. We can bridge things. We can lots of different stuff. So this allows you to edit an object. It's pretty self-explanatory. And then we have mesh tools, where there's it's kind of a extension of the edit mesh menu. So just more advanced mesh editing tools is pretty much kind of what it is. A little bit of an extension of edit mesh. So it's kind of the same thing, but an extension of that. When you're getting into, these are used for more nitty-gritty things, and, normals, color, UVs, edit UVs, muscle. So these are things that you guys are not familiar with yet, but we'll get into that later. But the main idea here to take away is you've got this, your top bar here, which pretty much, like most softwares, it sums up everything that the program has to offer. Um, okay, so there's the top menu. So you can access a lot of Maya's functions from up here. Um, and then you've got tabs, which are kind of the same thing. The tabs really just give you kind of a break all these things down, or most of these things that were up in the main menu shelf. Um, it puts them into button form so that it's kind of a visual representation of what is in these menu tabs up here. So it's kind of a visual version for those of us who like buttons and stuff like that. So it's a little bit redundant. I don't tend to use these buttons very much because I use a different way, which I'll get into in a second. I will show you. We've got on the side here we have different selection, move, and scale tools, or kind of what we would call transform tools. So transform meaning to change the position, the rotation, or the scale, of an object or its components. So if I have a cube here, and I go to this tool here, this is the selection tool. So the arrow is the select tool. So I can select things by clicking on them. That just allows me to select things. And I've got this. This is a lasso tool, so I can lasso around tools, or objects, to select them if I want. So I can go around here, if I want to, deselect or select, right? So if I have a bunch of objects in a scene, I can select them using the lasso tool, right? So now you need to carefully select things in a scene. And then I have paint selection, and paint selection is, more of a tool that you use to paint the selection of an object's components. So if I'm in face mode here, I make my brush size a little bit smaller. I can select by painting, an object. Oh, you can select by painting an object. Paint the faces of an object, just like that. So if I've got an object where I've got a whole bunch of faces in here, and I just want to carefully select some faces on an object, I can do that, using the paint selection tool. So it's really handy when you've got a lot of subdivisions in an object, and I can show you that. Add divisions, and add a bunch of divisions. Right. So I've got my paint selection tool here, so I can come in and I can paint selection. So it's kind of handy, right? Okay. So that's paint selection. And then I've got the move tool. So that's the move tool. It's simply you grab an object, you want to move it, right? You can move it. You can move its components, or you can move the object on its own. Okay. X-axis, Z-axis, Y-axis. Right. Pretty self-explanatory. And then we got the rotate tool, right? So rotate. So you can rotate on the Z. Right? You can rotate on the X. Rotate on the Y. Right? And scale. Last but not least, we can scale up, scale down, scale on the X, scale on the Z, scale on the Y. Okay. Okay. So these are all the transform tools on the side here, the left-hand side. We can find, when we want to move an object, transform it, we can find those tools on the left-hand side. A very basic visual representation, just these nice clean buttons. Okay. And then down here we've got our viewport layout settings. So we can say, well, maybe I don't want to work in one big viewport. Maybe I want to work in 4 views. A lot of people like to work in 4 views. And the reason is, you can work in the perspective mode here, which kind of allows you to get an orthographic view. You can sort of tumble around your objects in a scene up here on the top right hand side. And then if we want to see the object, moving, we want to move something, say we want to make it move this way, in the positive X direction. And then we want to sort of use the perspective view to sort of view that happening. We can do that. We can move it in the positive X direction, while tumbling around here. And we can come to the side view, where we can view the object from the side. So if we're moving back and forth this way, we're not going to see it move in the side because it's moving depth-wise, but we can move it in the Z on the side. So this is just a way, we can sort of, a lot of people like to work this way, actually, because it sort of gives them a better idea of what's actually going on in our three-dimensional space. So 4 views, that's it's quite popular. I personally like to work. If I click this button here, it allows me to go to to isolate one view. So I can tumble around, and I very often like to work this way, just because it gives me a lot more screen real estate, and it gives me a nice big area to work with, so I'm not really squinting at my screen. So that's nice. And if we come down here, we've got some other options. The third option is it basically gives us one view but allows us to see our outliner. Now this is really handy because we've got a view that we can tumble around in, and we can see all our objects in the scene, but at the same time we have our outliner open, and as I briefly mentioned I brought this up, the outliner is essentially the list of objects and nodes in our scene. So we've got a polycube here. I can rename this whatever. I don't know. I can just say cube 1. Right. And I've got a cone, and I can say cone 1. Okay. So this allows us to really be organized. I can see what's going on. I can also select my cameras or viewport. These are default cameras that are set up for the viewports, but I can still select them, and I can key them, and I can do some things to them. We won't get into that right now. Okay, so that's very handy, having this outliner. And if I click it again, or well, no, maybe not. If I switch to another one, it takes away my outliner, so I've got more screen real estate, and so on and so forth. And if I come down here, this opens up a split view from top to bottom, which shows me 2 things, where I can see my graph editor. Okay, so in here I've got a graph. So, graph editor, just to quickly demonstrate, is essentially a way for me to view animation. So I've got some quick animation here, so I can see, here I've got a set of keyframes here, a set of keyframes here, and I can scrub through. So if I'm animating a character or something, this is pretty handy, to be able to see my animation curves while I'm working in my view up here and keying things. It's pretty handy. So yeah, if I'm animating something, that's kind of an ideal way to work. If you have 2 monitors, I generally like to keep this view on one monitor, and then maybe over to the left somewhere I'll have another monitor where I've got my graph editor open, so I can keep this view freed up. So it's pretty good that way. But again, if you have one monitor, you can do this. Okay. And then if we come down here, um, this opens up. This is kind of an asset development viewport setup where we can see our material editor here. So we've got our shaders. We've got our shaders here, um, which we can texture, our objects with. So I can create like a blend shader or a Lambert shader and say, I don't know, we'll just call it white. I can come in, change my color, and then I can apply this shader to this object. Okay. Now that this is applied to this object, I can call it whatever. I can change it to whatever I want. I can call it whatever I want. So, I'll change it to a red or something. Really simple. So now I've got a red cube, right? So there's my red cube. And in here we can see we've got a node network. So I've got my shader here and my material and my shader. And we'll get into what materials and shaders are a little bit later, but right now I'm just kind of giving you an overview of the different viewports. So that's pretty handy if you're doing asset development to have this sort of a setup for your windows. You have an object, you have a modeled object, and you want to throw shaders on it and textures and make things look shiny like metal, and you can view it in the viewport while you're working with your shader nodes and all this stuff. And when you get more complex with your shader nodes, you can hook up 3 different shaders to one object, and you have you'll have this huge network of shaders that kind of connect together, and you build these complex shaders to make your objects look really good. So that's very handy. And then if we go down to the bottom, we have another viewport here which shows us our graph editor, our hypergraph hierarchy, which is kind of like the outliner, where it shows us a list of our objects, but in a more complex fashion. This is generally used for a lot of rigging applications. If you're setting up a character and using mathematical equations, some more complex things, you can use this window here to be engineering objects and characters. Because there is a lot going on when you're doing character rigging. So this is kind of nice. And we have our graph editor open again down here, so that maybe we have some animation going on, and we're setting up some rigging that is based on movement or morphing, and we need to be able to see the object and the animation as well. So we can see all 3 things. We can see the object moving and the shapes. We can see the curves so that we can edit them. And then we can also see the objects in our hypergraph hierarchy here. So we have, quite a bit of controllability with this viewport. So that's essentially, the viewports down here. I know it's quite a lot to know, but it's just keep in mind we can switch between these different views. And for whatever best works for us, for whatever job we're doing at the time. If you're a modeler, or rigger, or whatnot, or a lighting artist, you can customize your views to best suit what you're working on, the type of work you're doing, the type of job you're doing, and so on and so forth. So over here on the right-hand side of the screen, we have the attribute editor is what we can see. So what this is showing me is essentially, if I have nothing selected, we can't really see anything here on the right-hand side. So it's pretty blank. So it says make a selection to view attributes. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select my cube here, and I can see that under the cube, it's showing me, we got a whole list of these tabs here. So we've got transform attributes. Okay, well, what is a transform? A transform is if an object moves, scales, or rotates in 3D space. So, if I open up this tab, it shows me my translations, translations meaning, where is it moving. The translation is a movement. That's what a translation is. It's not a rotation, it's not a scale change, it's a movement. So if I moved in the positive Z, it'll show me that value. If I move in the negative Y, it'll show me that value. So translate, and I can see that everything is red, so red means it's been keyframed. So it shows me translations, rotations, it shows me if it's been scaled, and it tells me my rotation order and rotation axes and lots of different things. Very handy stuff. So it just gives me a list of what's going on with my object. It's pretty much, when we go into pivots, shows me my local space pivots, world space pivots, limited information. Things like limited information is very useful for rigging characters, which allows me to say if I want to put any limits, on the rotations or translations. So if I don't want it to translate or move past a certain point in space, I can say, well, I don't want it to move. The most I want it to move is -1 unit on the x-axis, and the maximum I want it to move is +1 on the x-axis. So it's basically constraining me to those two movements. So if we see now, come over here, I can't move this cube. I can only move it. It will not let me pull this cube past 1 unit. Okay, and we can actually see it happening here. So this is kind of handy if you're doing rigging and you have a character's arm and you want it to, only move if you have an elbow. Well, the elbow is not going to extend. If we extend our arm, the elbow is not going to extend past 180 degrees. The elbow goes straight. Unless you're breaking a character's arm, then it's not going to break. So you can set those limitations here. If I uncheck those, we can actually see that I can freely move the cube now. Okay. So limited information. That's what I can set there. And I can set it for either rotations. I can set it for scaling. I can set it for a lot of different stuff. And we go under display. We can show the visibility of the object. We can display the handle of the object. Ghosting information. So this just gives us to sum up, this gives us a overview of the attributes. So everything from display, translations, gives us kind of a list of what has happened to the object and the object's attributes. Or details, I guess you could say, details of the object, what's happened to it, where it is in 3D space, and lots of information on it. So that's this on the right-hand side, the attribute editor. So it's a list of the object's attributes. And if I hit Control A, I'm just going to hit Control A. I also get the channel box and layer editor, which is extremely handy. And what this shows me is the list of the translations, and it shows me all the channels, and it says that my object has translated -1.751 on the X, and a value on the Y, a value on the Z. It's rotated, it's scaled, and its visibility is turned on. I could set this value to 0. I could type 0 and it'll turn the visibility off on the object. So that's there. And this is you're going to be using this a lot when you're working with any object, especially when you're animating. You're going to be watching these channels, and we can see that the channels here are red, which means an object has been keyed, or keyframe has been set on the object, an animation keyframe. So we can see we've got these little red markers down here. And then we have a list of the object's inputs. And the inputs of an object, we'll get into that a little bit later. It just basically shows me, what has been done to the object. This is an object's history, is pretty much what we're viewing here. So it says here, poly subdivide, so it says that we have subdivided this object by a division factor of 1. And we've done it again here. Okay, so subdivide face, so 1, 2, and 3. That means basically it's giving us a list of what has happened to the object. And right here we have polycube 1, which is basically just telling us we created a polycube with a width and height and depth of 1 and subdivision width and height and depth of 1. Okay, so it's just giving us a list. The inputs is just it's basically the inputs means history. This is a history of what has happened to the object, and I can actually delete the history on this object by going to, I can click the object, I can go up here to edit, delete by type history, and watch what happens on the right hand side. If I delete that, we have no more input, so it's not showing us any history because there's no history to be seen because it's gone. So that's the channel box control editor up here, and the layer editor. The layers are down here. This is very useful. I can use the layer editor to, there's 3 different tabs here. There's a display layer, which allows me to keep a list of display layers. So if I want to just view the cube, I want to put the cube on a display layer, I can come over here and put it on a new layer. I can say cube display. I can give it a color. And so here I have 2 different buttons. The V button, which I can toggle on and off, allows me to view the object. So I can toggle that on and off. So if I have a whole bunch of objects in my scene and I only want to be focusing on one object, I can hit this V button because now this object is on, cube display. Okay, so I can display it in different ways. I can view it if I want. I can turn it off, the viewport, if I want it. I don't want to view it. And then I can also come over here. This button on the right hand side, just to the right of that button, is this button is used to template objects or use them as reference. So if we have this on T, it means template, and I can click it again and it'll change to an R. And what this means is I'm using it as a reference. So having the object on reference means, I can't select it, but I can still see it in the viewport shaded. Okay, so I can see it as a solid shaded object, but I can't select it. So when is this handy? Well, if I have an object that I've modeled, so say I have this cube here, and I want to model another piece of an object along with it, so if this cube were a character's head and I wanted to model an eyeball and put the eyeball into the cube, so let's go ahead and do that. We'll say poly primitive polysphere. So I've got a polysphere here, and I'm going to scale it down, and I'm just going to come up to move the object. I'm going to move it, and I want to place the object into here. So now I can grab my sphere. If I need to grab my sphere and position it, I don't have to worry about grabbing the cube as well. Because that can be really annoying when you're trying to move an object around and use another object as a reference object, and you're getting it. It's getting in the way. You can't select it. So that's really handy. So that's when the button is on R. If I change this button to template, it's the same thing, except it's in sort of a wireframe cage. I don't really prefer using this method because it kind of gets annoying because you can't really see the object that you're working with very well. You can only see this very rudimentary sort of wireframe cage, and I'm not really crazy about that. But it's all kind of preference. It's just based on how you like to work. And last but not least, if I click it again, and there's nothing there, it means I can now select the object again and I don't have it template I don't have it as a template, and I don't have it as a reference object. So I can now select the object again, and again, there's my view button. So this is really handy, and this is just the one cube display. Okay, if I wanted to say put all of these into a display layer, I can select all of these objects, and I can create a new layer, and I can say I can just say all display, all object display. I can give it a color. Let's make it red maybe. Okay. So now I can turn these off all at once. I can template them all at once. I can reference them all at once. And then I can, if I have my cube here, see, I have now put this cube into another layer. Okay, so it's not I can't control it from this layer anymore, because I've now placed this cube into another layer with these other objects. But anyhow, that's the display tab. I can use it to display and use objects as referencing. It's very handy when you have a very complex scene, a lot going on. So let's go over to the render tab. Render tab is used for render layers. We'll get into a little bit about this maybe in the course a little later on. Basically, when you want to do some pretty heavy compositing and visual effects work, and you want to split the details of an object like shadows and highlights, and you want to separate those and be able to work with them in a compositing software package later on when you're putting your final images together and your final renders together. This is where you would do it. You would select certain attributes of the object, some render attributes of the object, and you would tell it to, you would create a new render layer, and you would call this layer, shads for shadows, and then you call this layer, we can put another thing here, and highlights. And so for shadows, we'd go in here and we'd say past contribution maps, and then we create past contribution map and add selected, and we have a contribution map here, and we can say delete, and we can add a new one. We can say, okay, let's create an empty one, and remove it, okay, whatnot. Pretty self-explanatory. Anyway, yeah, we can split up highlights, shadows, details of the render on the object. And again, this comes into play when we're working with compositing, so heavier compositing. And we're not going to be really getting into that in this course. We're going to be just doing some pretty basic object creation and that kind of stuff. And then over here we have animation layer. So this allows us to put different sorts of keyframes on layers. So if we have storytelling keyframes we want to put on one layer, and we have keyframes and breakdowns and in-betweens, and we want to separate those up. This is where we do it. I don't generally use this, but if you're working in gaming and or you're working with really complex stuff, sometimes it can be helpful to separate it into layers. I don't generally use it. I just work straight ahead and put all my stuff on one layer. But you can if you want to, if you're doing some pretty complex animation and it's easier for you to work that way, then so be it. So that's the right hand side. We have the channel box editor where if we select an object, we can see we've got our channels. We can see the history of the object here, and we can see display, render, and animation tabs so that we can put them on animation layers, render layers, display layers, and really stay organized. Keep our scenes organized and nice and clean so that it's easier for us to work through the project. And then if we hit Control A, we can see the attribute editor. So this shows us a list of attributes. The cubes transforms sort of another representation of the channel box editor, except we can do some neat stuff in here. And then we can see display attributes, so component displays. We can come into render stats, and I can say don't cast shadows on the object, don't receive shadows. The visibility, so the camera won't see it when it renders. All sorts of cool stuff. Okay. So that's the right hand side of the user interface. And then if we come down to the bottom, we've got a few different things. We've got the time slider, which I can sort of, if I have animation on an object, I can take the time slider and I can move across here. I can scrub through my animation. Right now we're only set to 120 frames, but so, you can see what's going on with my object, whatnot. And I have a little bar down here, which is the mel command line, and this is basically used to call up commands and procedures if you're doing any scripting or you have a plugin that you want to run. Say I have roadkill, which is roadkill can't find procedure. Okay, well apparently it's having a hard time loading. But anyway, I don't know why that is. Maybe I forgot to install it. I thought it was working, but anyway. Mel command line allows you to call up commands from this line here. So if you're doing any scripting, if you have any scripts or things you want to call up through Mel, which is Maya's embedded language, you can just edit. You can just type in a little code here, and it'll run the application that you're trying to run or the script you're trying to run, and so on and so forth. And then over here, if I let's say just write some code or whatever, cannot find procedure. So over here we can see this bar here basically gives us any kind of error messages. So this is handy if you're doing any scripting and or you're trying to do something. If Maya doesn't like what you're doing, it'll tell you error. It'll give you an error and then the line that the error is on, and that corresponds to the script editor here. So error line 1. So it just gives us an idea. You don't have to worry about that, but this just gives us this kind of Maya's way of talking to us. So if we do something and the software doesn't like it, this bar will give us any messages. So the software talks to us, it speaks to us, tells us what's going on. So we can see displays the command response. So we can open the script editor to display more of the history. So this gives us a history of what's going on. It's kind of Maya's way of talking to us. And then we have over here we have this little button above there, which is preferences. And this allows us to change anything from the interface preferences to the display preferences, the settings on animation assets, cameras, dynamics, modules, applications, so on and so forth. So things like, if we're making sure that, animation settings, we want to make sure that, we're running at 24 frames a second. We can come in here and change that. Should be able to change it somewhere. So we've got if we want to specify the tangents, we want to say that when they come in they're weighted. We can say I want my tangents to be clamped and linear, whatever. We can change those things. We can change those things as they come in. So and so on and so forth. So that's kind of an overview of Maya and its user interface. It's, again, very, very powerful software. Um, and oh, up here I forgot to mention we have the viewport. In the viewport, we've got a few different ways to view things. So, if we come up here, we can sort of say that we want to view, let's say, um, the camera settings, right? So we want to see the field chart. So we can turn on a field chart there. Um, Shading. So this allows us to see the shading on an object. So wireframe unshaded. So when our object is not selected, we can see the wireframe on it, and we can say wireframe unshaded. We can turn that off again, and we can also come back and say camera settings, field chart. We don't want to view that anymore, so we can go back to that nice clean view. And the renderer, we can specify if we want to we can specify if we want to use like a higher quality renderer, if we have textures and lighting on this object. Right now there's no lights in the scene, so obviously it goes black when I hit the 7 key to turn on my lights and view the lighting. So we have no lights in the scene, so that's why it's black. So we have a few different choices here, and we can show if we say we don't want to see polygons, we turn that off. Our object isn't shown because it's made of polygons. So a few different ways we can view things. Anyway, yeah, that's a very basic general overview of Maya and its user interface. So that's it for this first little introductory to Maya and its user interface. And in the next video, we're going to go through the main keys, the most important keys to use when working in Maya, and we're going to talk about just getting used to where to find things, because one of the most important things when you're working with any software is being able to find what you need and find it quickly, so that you can do the job and do it properly. So that's the next video, and I hope this first video was a good introduction to Maya and its user interface, and we're going to move on to the next video, which is getting to know how to find things. See you then.